coming up on Art Palace.
But as it happens, this is the earliest mention of Art Palace of the West that I've been able to verify.
Welcome to Art Palace, produced by Cincinnati Art Museum. This is your host, Russell Eyrig. Here at the Art Palace, we meet cool people and then talk to them about art. Today's cool person is Geoff Edwards, the museum's archivist and records manager at the Mary R. Schiff Library and Archives. So how did you end up at the Art Museum?
It's quite a convoluted path. I actually started out as an archaeologist back in the UK, specifically Egyptology.
Okay.
But I kind of specialized myself out of a job because, there's not that much call for Egyptologists.
Right.
Fun as it was to study and to go and get to dig in Egypt, I kind of found myself not having a job, and I ended up, going into doing something which was fine, but not exactly what I wanted. And I kind of rethought about how, what I was going to do. And I kind of realized I enjoyed the sort of filing side of things, as it were, like going through the old papers and trying to sort them out and make them more easily accessible. And I thought, hang on, I think there's a job that involves something like that. And that's when I kind of looked into archives, and I eventually retrained to become an archivist, and so I started working in the UK in archives over there. I eventually moved over here. I followed my wife over. She was over in the UK working, and I followed her back.
So you met there. Was she just there for work or study, or
she was teaching? She was teaching in London, where I was living. She was actually teaching English. And
that's usually not the case, right? You hear that story all the time. Like, I was in, Thailand teaching English, but it's like, I think they've got it under control.
So we just kind of, our paths crossed, and eventually I followed her back over here. Spent a while in Indiana working at the State Archives in Indianapolis. Then we moved down to this part of the world. She's from Fort Thomas originally, so we ended up back down here, and I sort of cast around for opportunities, and I was volunteered at several local, museums and archives, and the Art Museum was one of them. So I started off volunteering. Eventually, my predecessor left the position, and I was able to slide on in there, and I've been here since 2013 now.
Nice.
So, over 5 years.
Are you still passionate about Egyptology in any way, or is it just sort of totally gone at this point?
Oh, no. I'm still really interested, in what's going on. I keep my eye on the field. I'm still friends with people who actually did manage to find employment in that world. So I do keep my eye on what's going on, the latest discoveries. And I always look back on the time that I got to go to dig there with great sort of fondness. It was it was quite a harsh sort of month at a time. I went for a few years in a row and spent a month out on the Egyptian coast, quite near the Libyan border, digging up a fort from the time of Ramesses II.
Wow.
But it was quite a shock to the system. It was quite a hard month.
Physically grueling.
Yeah, physically in the, the heat and the toiling in the trenches.
That's what you see in movies, right? Is that part of it, the dig, but then you kind of forget, like, oh yeah, that has the potential to be also the most grueling part of the job.
Oh yeah. It was a lot of fun. There were a group of students from Liverpool University. I was one of them. It was a good sort of world building experience, and getting to seeing what it was like to live in that part of the world.
You said you did other archivist jobs before this, right? You said, were you working for other institutions as old as this one, or older, or?
Back in the UK, the place where I worked principally was the Glamorgan Archives, which was based in Cardiff, in Wales.
Yeah.
They are, I guess it's the closest equivalent here is a state archive. So it holds everything really. So official records, personal records, business records. It's a bit of everything. And it was probably founded about the same time as the art museum here, but the actual records, they go back to, medieval times. So, the actual institution, same sort of age, but the actual records, they go back
much older.
Yeah, 1,000 years or so.
Yeah.
So it was a bit different coming to work here. Kind of, you have to adjust your perspective a bit on.
Yeah, when you're looking at something like that, does the sort of scale of time affect what is considered important?
Yes, I think it does. Anything that survived, 1,000 years gains some kind of importance, even if it's just, the medieval equivalent of a shopping list or a text message, just something transitory and not terribly significant in the grand scheme of things. But the fact that it survived, that many years, gives it, a certain cachet, I guess.
So you've been working on a book about the art museum, and you brought a copy of it here. It's just called Cincinnati Art Museum.
Yes, we didn't think too much about the title.
Too crazy a title. But this is a part of the certain. Well, you describe it more because you'll do a better job.
Okay, it's published by Arcadia Publishing. It's one of their Images of America series. So. There are hundreds of titles in the series. Right. You see them everywhere. Sort of every, community or aspect of, a town's history seems to have a copy. The zoo here has got one. There's one on the Cincinnati brewing history, all those sort of topics. Right. And I don't quite know how they came to contact us, but they did get in touch and say, would you like to do one? Mm-hmm. And we said, oh, yes, please. Because in the archives, we've got some fantastic images of the museum, of the Art Academy, everything that's happened over the past 140 odd years. And we're always keen to try and, make those more widely available, make them accessible to people. So this seemed like a great way to do it. The book is primarily photographs. It's 275 images, I think. Mm-hmm. They've each got a little caption that goes with them that tells a story. It's basically a photographic history of the museum from the 1880s to very recently, to last year, basically.
Oh, nice. Did you have to write all those captions?
Yes.
That's why this is your book.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at them, the captions, they're not very long. They're not more than, a couple of hundred words. Right. But that was part of the difficulty.
Absolutely.
Because there were very strict editorial guidelines as to how long each caption could be. Mm-hmm. Some of them, there was so much I wanted to say, I had to kind of be quite brutal in what I could and couldn't say.
Yeah, succinct writing is very challenging.
It is.
It's like it's why writing a good label is hard too.
I empathize a lot more with the curators when they have to write their labels now. I kind of wanted to make sure I included, the big events, the important parts of our history, but I also wanted to kind of get in as much of the sort of small details and the more personal touches that I came across as I was researching it. So it's a mixture of the big events in the museum's history, the opening, the various wings, and some of the major exhibitions we've had over the years. But it also tells the stories of some of the individuals who've been part of the staff over the years. Tries to put the museum in the context of the community and show it's not just, a big building full of pictures or statues. It's been having classes for children here since the early 20th century. Part of the founding mission of the museum was to bring art to the community here. So that's what I've tried to.
Is that actually what's on the cover? The image is one of those classes?
Yeah. Like I said, back in the 1920s, we started holding classes at the museum for children, free Saturday morning classes. Mm-hmm. So anyone could come along, and the cover image shows one of those classes from the 1920s. The kids sitting on the original front steps of the museum, which are now buried behind what is the Adams Emery wing, where the Cincinnati wing is now. Mm-hmm. But those classes, people flocked in from miles around, come and be part of them. The kids would walk for a couple of hours to get here.
And I think they continued at least some variation of that for quite a while, because I've talked with older people who tell me, oh yeah, I used to take classes here as a kid. So I know it continued for a while.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think they went through in that form until maybe the early 80s.
Okay.
But yeah, I've spoken to a lot of people who even decades later still talk very fondly of their time coming up to the museum on the streetcar for the Saturday morning art classes.
It shows you how important those kind of experiences are for people. Those people make a real connection with the building and with the museum, and it becomes a part of their memories and a part of what they connect to in the city. And so it can have this really, when I hear people tell me about these classes that they took as children and they're now in their 70s, and you go, oh wow, you remember this. Yeah. That's really interesting.
It has an impact, definitely.
Yeah,
I know that John Ruthven was one of the. I met him at an event a year or so ago, and one of the first things that he mentioned on here, and I was the archivist here, was to tell me about his experiences as part of these classes, how much he enjoyed them, and how fresh they were still in his memory, and how they kind of helped make him the artist that he would later become.
Yeah. Were there any images or things you discovered while putting together the book that surprised you?
I did discover a lot of things about individuals who have worked here in the past that kind of, was a revelation to find it. There's a lot of stories out there I'd like to be able to tell more of, because there just wasn't room in the captions in this book. But, our third director, Walter Seipel, who was here through the 1920s, through the 1940s, I discovered a letter that somebody had written to us about him, describing how he'd originally started off as an actor, and he was sort of described as darkly brooding, and you can see that in the photographs. But he apparently found that life as an actor too tough, too sort of demanding on him, and he decided to retrain in art history, and eventually ended up being the museum's director. And that's a story I'd like to follow up on a bit more.
Yeah, that's a weird career path. Definitely. I don't think a lot of people have followed that. I mean, I guess you do have to just do a total about face, because it's not like you could really walk in as an actor and just start, well, I'm here for the museum director job. You have to work your way back up. But that is interesting.
Mm-hmm. And our first conservator was a guy by the name of Wilson Stamper. He started here in the 1930s. And he also taught at the Art Academy. Sort of, he split his time between conserving and teaching at the Academy. During the Second World War, he became a photographer for the Navy, and he was there during the fighting for Iwo Jima. So he was one of the photographers there who recorded images of that. I don't think he recorded the flag raising, but he was one of the people there recording the fighting. And there's so many little stories like that. I'd like to follow up on some of those. They might be blog posts in the future where I can expand a bit more.
Well, and I know you've seen every once in a while you'll have a picture or something that will be sort of shocked by maybe the museum's behavior at times.
That's true.
That's sort of like sanctioned things that were museum sanctioned events that you just look at and you go, well, we would never do that today. And that kind of stuff always makes me laugh.
Yeah, there are quite a few photographs of, people sitting around in the galleries, smoking, drinking. Right. Yeah. One of the primary culprits is Philip Adams, who was a director from the 1940s through to the 1970s. He always seems to have had a cigarette in his hand in all of the photos. So yeah, that was not something that I think we would condone today.
I mean, it's just sort of so funny because you would imagine the conservator you just mentioned would just be thinking like, stop it. Or maybe they're just like, well, I've got a job, like job security.
There are several photographs of him sitting around sort of casually leaning against, the plinths of statues, or with a cigarette in his hand, chatting away, or he seems to have been quite a character, was Phil Adams.
I feel like there was, I saw a picture one time you maybe showed us of a sort of large banquet or something that was set up also in one of the galleries in the Dutch gallery, maybe. Was that something too, where they like actually served food and things in the galleries?
Yeah, I'm sure they did it multiple times, but, I think when it opened,